All right. I think maybe we're live now. Could somebody please tell me if you are hearing me? We had a little glitch there. I'm going to assume that we're live now. Yes, I think we're live now. Okay. I'm going to start over. Welcome to the Theosophical Society of San Francisco. This is our Sunday evening Facebook Live program for September 20th, 2020, which happens to be my birthday. It's not my 111th birthday, but it is my birthday. And so I'm very grateful to all of you who have joined me here tonight. And sorry for that little technical glitch there in the beginning. I'm going to start the title of this talk. Starting over. Straw Dogs, a Mysterious Valley, and the Power of Nothing. Deep Magic for a Time of Great Peril. But first, a disclaimer. The views I will articulate in this talk are mine. They are not the views of the Theosophical Society of San Francisco, although I am confident that these views are in accord with the three avowed objects that we operate under. We don't discuss politics here at the Lodge, and I won't tonight. Just as we have no religious dogma or creed, we do not have a political ideology. This is not a political talk, but I will discuss history, psychology, and governance. I will discuss human rights and environmental protection. Because one of the central themes in my work over the last 2 decades has been to champion altruism and sustainability as both spiritual and existential imperatives. Spiritual and existential imperatives. I say spiritual because there is that within us that goes on beyond each incarnation. Never the spirit is born, the spirit shall cease to be never. Never is time, it is not. End and beginning are dream. Birthless, deathless, and changeless remaineth the spirit forever. And yet, I say an existential imperative because this life, this singular life, this utterly unique life that each of us has is precious, irreplaceable. And it does end. It begins and it ends. And even though there is that which goes on and really never has gone anywhere, it just abides in the eternal now. But there is also a part of us that is uniquely here and now in this body, in this life, in this skein of karma, and it perishes. So it's precious. This moment is precious. This life is precious. All the connections that brought us together here in this etheric circle tonight, all of that is precious. And about the title, Straw Dogs, um, A Mysterious Valley, and the Power of Nothing. Uh, I'm gonna explore with you 2 teachings the ancient Taoist texts, and I'm going to explore with you two arcane teachings from the legendary 21st century, the legendary 20th century, although he really did live in the 21st century, the legendary 20th century American sage, Joe Miller. Sometimes I refer to him as my Yoda, as some of you know. I'm going to get to these four teachings. But before that, we're going to have a reality check about where we are as a species, where we are as a civilization. And um, as we move through that reality check, every once in a while, I'm going to blurt out power or straw dogs or a mysterious valley. And when we get to the end, you'll see more about what I mean when I blurt out those declarations. I'm also going to be reading from prepared text because the spoken word and the written word are you cannot separate them from me. And they are the medium through which the chi flows. And I want to make sure that my languaging is respectful of the venue, and I want to make sure that I get through a certain number of tasks I've set before us. So I'm going to be referring to the written text, and the written text will be posted on my site, wordsofpower.earth, after sometime late tonight, and it will have with it accompanying images, which will further illuminate and contextualize what we're talking about. Do you remember the time before? Can you remember what it was like even 9 months ago, even 6 months ago? Can you? Maybe you live inside a bubble of denial. Maybe you've lost discernment in the onslaught of disinformation. Maybe you are bound up. Maybe you've gone numb from fear or exhaustion. But if you are one of those among us who follow what Lao Tzu called the way of the Tao, who follow what Tathagata called the wheel of the due sweet law, excellent in the beginning, excellent in the middle, and excellent at the end. If you are one of those among us who listens to Gaia, she is always whispering encouragement to us. She is always singing lullabies to us. She is always shouting warnings to us. If you follow any of these ways or all of these ways, then you will perhaps hear this message and you may resonate with it. So in 2010, a decade ago now, I began writing and speaking about what I called the singularity in anticipation of itself. 2010, the singularity in anticipation of itself. Oh, at that time, it's ongoing, but at that time there was a lot of chatter among intellectuals and philosophers about the potential for the unintended consequences of the rise of artificial intelligence. Well, some great movies were made from it. Some great science fiction yarns were spun from it. And it's an issue. It's a real issue. But at that time, I interjected myself into that dialogue, and I said, um, those concerned with AI were missing a far greater and much more imminent threat. I suggested that we ourselves, the human species, our civilization, was itself the singularity, that human intelligence itself was the singularity, and its unintended consequences, our unintended consequences, are what we should be most concerned about. That human intelligence, I said, was leading itself into something inconceivable, an impossibility, a singularity. And from this singularity, something would have to emerge from this impossibility, something new, a new us, a new version of the human reality, our collective reality. Something new would have to emerge from this singularity if we were to go on. It could never be the same. 2010. And then by 2017, I gave a talk and I said, well, the singularity has arrived. And we could see the evidence of that all around us. And then in 2018 and 2019, in a talk, I said, well, we've crossed over. We're on the other side of the event horizon now. In other words, we're in a black hole. Now, you know, well, it's much more complex than this, but matter is annihilated in a black hole. It's crushed, so to speak. It's much more complex than that because matter isn't even just matter. But the only hope, if you've crossed over the event horizon into a black hole, metaphorically speaking, maybe metaphor, maybe not, when you cross into a black hole, your hope is that what you've really entered is a wormhole. And a wormhole, for our purposes, has a black hole, two mouths, a black hole at each end. So you go in one mouth of the wormhole, and God is willing, you come out the other side, out the other wormhole, into a new universe, a new version of your universe, a new version of yourself, a new version of your species. So we lean forward into utter darkness in the hopes of stumbling through the wormhole, the black hole at the other end of the wormhole into a new version of our world. Otherwise, we're crushed. This is where we are as a species. Now, this word, when I was starting to ruminate about this talk, the word scourge came to me. Scourge. Merriam-Webster, whip, especially one used to inflict pain, punishment, an instrument of punishment, a cause of wide or great affliction. I've been living with this word scourge. And then the Washington Post journalist Bob Woodward came out with a new book, and he was discussing COVID-19 in it, and he referred to it as a scourge just last week. And so I laughed to myself that, well, this term is hitting some of us. So I say currently we are being driven downward, deeper and deeper into dystopia. We are staggering under the painful lashes of three great scourges: the climate crisis, and by extension, the sixth great extinction, scourge number one. Scourge number two, the COVID-19 pandemic. Scourge number three, the rise of authoritarianism in countries across the globe. 97, this was about a week ago. About a week ago, 97 large fires were burning in the western United States, 6,200 square miles, California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Idaho, Utah. Smoke from the blazes had impacted the entire West, a health hazard to millions, and much more. The global climate crisis could see more than 1 billion people displaced from their homes in the next 30 years. When I post the text version of this, there'll be links to all of these data points and news stories. The world is losing its mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fish, and with them the security of our ecosystems that have supported humanity since it first emerged. This year's report, Living Planet Report 2020, shows that these animal communities have shrunk on an average of 68%. 68% between 1970 and 2016. Scourge number two, the pandemic. Johns Hopkins University, which is giving us the most credible data on all this, is projecting 400,000 deaths in the United States alone by the end of 2020. We're already over 200,000. And Amnesty International just came out with has a study out as of maybe earlier this month. 7,000 health workers, at least, all these numbers you should say at least, 7,000 health care workers have died in the fight against COVID. 1,300 in Mexico, about 1,077 in the United States, and on and on and on. And just over the weekend, maybe late Friday night, early Saturday morning, Dr. Adeline Fagan, 28 years old, OBGYN resident, died fighting COVID, contracted COVID in the fight against COVID and died. The study from the CDC just put out last week. The majority of children, teens, and young adults who die from COVID-19 are Hispanic, Black, or Native American. 78% of those deaths, even though they only represent 41% of combined 41% of the American population. And the pandemic, the economic consequences could push as many globally. The economic consequences globally could push as many as 86 million more children into poverty than already are. And hunger is rising because of COVID, not famine hunger. Climate change will bring famine. Hunger already is in parts of the world, but hunger based on loss of income. People and rising price of food. And scourge number three is the rise of 21st century authoritarianism. 21st century authoritarianism. in a congressional hearing earlier this year, former Secretary of State, United States Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, and former NATO General Secretary and another transatlantic security expert were giving testimony. And Albright said, warning signs abound across the globe, the discarding of mainstream politicians, the emergence of leaders who seek to divide rather than unite, the purest of political victory at all costs, and the invocation of national greatness of people who identify greatness only with themselves. And Andrea Kendall Taylor said, this is the most trying time for democracy since the 1930s, when fascism spread across much of Europe. Another another angle to look at this rise of what we're calling 21st century authoritarianism is the term climate barbarism, uh, coined by Naomi Klein. And climate barbarism is a form of adaptation or presumed adaptation. It says it no longer denies that where we've entered an age of massive disruption, and that many hundreds of millions of people are going to be forced from their homelands, and huge swaths of the planet are going to be uninhabitable. But it just says, well, so what? We're going to protect ours. We are the chosen. We are the whitest, or the most, or the smartest, or the most affluent, and we're just going to fortress ourselves in and survive the coming famine, flood, and pestilence. Really, biblical terms are not biblical terms are appropriate to this moment. It didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be this way, but it is. This is the way it is. And yet, as horrific as all of this is, it is not insurmountable. It is not insurmountable. Our circumstances are not hopeless. We need to wear masks. We need to practice social distancing. People need rent relief and unemployment. We need to hunker down and wait for a vaccine, a proven safe, effective vaccine. Pandemic denialism is as ill and as evil as climate denialism. Those who follow into climate denialism are ill, and pandemic denialism are ill. Those who, just as those who, and those who lead others into pandemic denialism or climate denialism, knowing, in many cases, knowing the dangers, knowing the reality, knowing the science is not wrong. That's evil. And I don't use that term lightly, and I don't use it as a moral term. I use it more as a diagnosis. We need to rapidly phase out the burning of fossil fuels. Robust and economically viable alternatives are available to us now. We need to drastically reduce our consumption of meat. We need to empower women. And yes, we need to confront the problem of unsustainable human population growth. We need to rededicate ourselves to human rights and environmental protection. We need to strengthen our democratic institutions. All of this is doable. Altruism and sustainability as spiritual and existential imperatives. This is not ideology. This is science and humanism. This is the essence of the path of love, the path of clarity of mind. Some among us have lost their livelihoods to the pandemic. Some among us have lost their homes and belongings to the wildfires. Some among us are even dealing with both tragedies simultaneously, directly in their own lives. Great forests, old, deeply, richly magical forests have been devastated. The powerful wisdom of all the trees that you know, the trees that have laughed and wept and stood in silence with you, the exquisite throbbing of all the forest creatures, all those wild beings who recognize their mandala. Such loss, unbearable, unspeakable, inconsolable, grief and gratitude like inhalation and exhalation, grief and gratitude like inhalation and exhalation. The pandemic continues. Some of us face eviction, some of us face hunger, some of the lives of our children if we send them to school. Hundreds of thousands have died of COVID in isolation, cut off from their loved ones. I've been remembering uh, when the legendary American sage Joe Miller, toward the end of his life, during one of his stays in the ICU, he just wanted to go home. He just wanted to lie down in his own bed, even if it was just to die. And his bed was narrow and simple, like a monk's bed, but it was his. Joe Miller did make it home, but in the misery of the pandemic, many have not. Now, every night, as I go toward my bed, I wonder if or when I will find myself in such circumstances. And I am grateful for every opportunity to simply lie down in my own bed. I am grateful that I am not homeless. I am grateful that I have not fallen ill. This is where we are. But there's still more. The brutal deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. These atrocities traumatized our collective psyche, triggered many weeks of massive nationwide demonstrations, yes, tens of thousands of peaceful, masked citizens in the street. Human rights, the most, uh, some of the most fundamental of human rights as articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, signed on by all the countries in the United Nations. I think it was all, but we were one of them in the 1940s after the end of the Second World War. Take nothing for granted. When you get in your bed to go to sleep, feel the gratitude always. Feel the gratitude and feel the grief. Always listen for the sounds of the sands falling in the hourglass. We do not know the number of sands, this number of sand grains, but we do know it is a finite number of sand grains. Feel the gratitude. It can all be taken away in a moment. It will all be taken away, one way or another. We know not the hour. Gratitude and grief, like inhalation and exhalation. This is what it means to be alive. There are some further insights and perspectives I want to share with you. As I said, first from uh, the history of the 20th century, and then some occult teachings from the ancient future, courtesy of Lao Tzu and Joe Miller. And we'll one more dip into history here. Some lessons from history. Some lessons from history as we move into herstory. I say Herstory because another one of the uh, overarching themes that I've spent the last 20 years writing and speaking about is the ascendancy of the ascendancy of the feminine, human and divine, in all aspects of human endeavor, in business, in arts, in science, in politics, governance, really. Um, all aspects of our lives, the ascendancy of the feminine, literally the rise of women leaders in governance and in commerce and in science and in the arts, but also within each person, male or female or whatever gender identification is yours, whatever you are. There is a feminine wisdom in your consciousness that in many of us and in reflected in our societies and our cultures has been uh, put down, oppressed, constricted, confined, exploited, abused. And that feminine aspect of our psyche, that feminine aspect of our soul has to come forth now to lead. Something else Joe Miller talked about in the 1980s, but I'll come back to that. But just quickly here for a moment, some lessons from history as we move into herstory. Democracy is Gaian. Authoritarianism is not. Democracy is indigenous to the mysterious valley of the dark goddess. But like everything Gaian, democracy cannot live in a vacuum. It is interdependent with a free press, with the rule of law, with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and without the nutrients provided by these other vital elements of its ecosystem, democracy dies. Now, I've studied the authoritarian regimes of the 20th century. Uh, I started studying them with great interest in the 1980s, actually. I didn't really connect all the timeline together before, but that happens to be when. And many excellent studies and texts. But just recently, I read through the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, a precursor to the CIA, commissioned a Harvard, no, it wasn't Harvard, but it was an Ivy League psychiatrist to do a psychological profile of Hitler as we went deeper into the war, deeper into the World War II, and schizophrenic, um, impotent, drug addict, some serious daddy issues. It's a remarkable document, short, but it's a remarkable document. And I also revisited recently there's a psychiatrist who was assigned to the Nuremberg tribunals, and he wrote a report on 22 cells, the 22 cells that those who were tried for crimes against humanity were kept. And his insights are uh, very illuminating too. But just 4 points here. Authoritarian regimes need Hitlers. They need pathological men, yes, men typically. Pathologically ill men desirous of acting out sadistic fantasies. And they also need Eichmanns. They need men, mostly, who are willing to be cogs in the wheels of woe, shameless enough to wrap their own passive soul illnesses in rationales like just following orders. And also, authoritarian regimes also need uh, the hidden hand of those who underwrite it all, the oligarchs, whether it's for diamonds or oil or precious minerals or um, opium or cocaine. Uh, there's always somebody who's underwriting all of this. And the fourth thing that an authoritarian regime needs is some kind of bizarre delusional worldview with which to overwrite a society's collective reality, just as in a cult. Hitler and Himmler, the others, they were obsessed with the occult. They were obsessed with paranormal phenomena, but it was as warped. But their interest in these studies was as warped and perverted as their moral and philosophy and their philosophy of governance. What do I mean by a warped and delusional worldview? Well, uh, here's a piece recently published, justsecurity.org, that takes a look at QAnon, a current phenomena, QAnon, and its roots. The roots that many people who have gotten caught up in this bizarre, delusional worldview don't really realize. Because it's really the same narrative, the same narrative repackaged by QAnon. It's really the same narrative that was put forth in the protocols of the elders of Zion and in Nazi literature. Um, this is Gregory Stanton. I have studied and worked to prevent genocide for 40 years. First international found the first international anti-genocide coalition. See such hate-filled conspiracy theories as merely warning signs of deadly genocidal violence. QAnon's conspiracy theory is a rebranded version of the protocols of the elders of Zion. They support narcissistic demagogues they hope will rescue them. This kind of mentality. There's another story was in Canadian broadcasting. CBC posted a fascinating interview with Sean Korn, a yoga teacher. Sean Korn, who Los Angeles yoga teacher. She found herself having to combat the rise of QAnon inspired conspiracy theory in the wellness space. She says, I just didn't think I would be having to talk about all of this. Things like a cabal of people in the US that are kidnapping children and drinking their blood. Korn told, as it happens, I never thought that this would be a conversation I would have to have with my community to say, like, this isn't true. This isn't happening. Please use more discernment. And just quickly, two more lessons from the history of 20th century as we shift into herstory of the 21st century. You know, the Spanish Civil War, Franco and the fascists say they never had the majority support of the populace of Spain. They never had anything close to the majority support of the populace of Spain. It was a minority, but it was a brutal, ruthless minority. And those forces throughout the political spectrum in Spain all of them, left, right, and center, they could not, they formed a united front against fascism, but they could not work together. They could not overcome their differences. And Franco ruled for over 30 years in Spain. The fascists ruled Spain for over 30 years. And then there's an example of Mussolini in Italy, who ruled Italy for 20 years. Now, he invaded North Africa to uh, colonize North Africa, and his thugs could drag people off the street and disappear them. But in the end, uh, it was him and a handful of uh, followers trying to escape over the Alps, and he was caught and captured and shot, and um, his mistress and him and some of the others were hung by their feet in the piazza. So, however invincible an authoritarian leader may seem, they fall. They are vulnerable to the power of nothing, to the power of nothing. Okay. The reality check is over. But before we move on, I want to show you this, which will be online later. See these three photos? Anne Frank attending Montessori school in 1940. She was, I don't know if she was 12 then or 13. I think 11, maybe, perhaps 11 or 12. And in the middle is the great Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca. And the woman on the right, Rosa, she was an Italian resistance fighter, pregnant Italian resistance fighter, who the Mussolini thugs shot and killed. Gabriel Lorca, the great poet, Garcia Lorca, the great poet, was also assassinated. And Anne Frank, of course, you know her story, ended in the concentration camps. Look at these faces. These are the faces of innocence. These are the faces of joy. These are the faces, I would argue, of the deep feminine within each person. Joyful, loving faces. These were threats to a pathology. So I said we would get into 4 deep teachings, arcane teachings, 2 from the ancient Tao and 2 from um, the legendary American sage Joe Miller. And the first 2 are from the Tao, and they concern straw dogs and this mysterious valley I have alluded to. And Joe once said to somebody that if he had to go away and live on a desert island and he could only take one book with him, he would take the Tao Te Ching. Oh, I smiled when I heard that because I had a life. My relationship with the Tao Te Ching started when I was like, I don't know, 14. And if you had asked me what my favorite chapters in the Tao Te Ching were in my teens or my 20s or my 30s, I would have said chapter 70. And then if you had asked me in my 40s, I would have said chapter 71. But in the last 20 years or so, I've been spending more time with chapters 5 and 6. So we're going to just briefly touch on chapter 5 and 6 of the Tao Te Ching in 2 different translations. It's great to get many different translations of the same chapter in Lao Tzu and read them all, because they're very short, and read them all together and see how something that is inexplicable can be pointed to by the number of earnest translations that attempt to point toward it. Chapter 5 is Straw Dogs. And this is the translation of Dr. Henry Way, who was an extraordinary being who was part of the life of this lodge. Wrote an amazing translation and commentary on the I Ching, and an amazing translation and commentary of the Tao Te Ching. Chapter 5, Straw Dogs. Chapter 5, Straw Dogs. That's Nicholas Warwick's Trans-Himalayan Near Sage. The view, the expanse, the emptiness. Heaven and earth are not kindly. Heaven and earth are not kindly. They equate the 10,000 things with straw dogs. The sage is not kindly. He equates the people with straw dogs. The space between heaven and earth, it is hollow, yet it never fails to supply. The more it is worked, the more it gives forth. That is, heaven and earth are not kindly. The sage is not kindly. This could be so easily misinterpreted or misused. This chapter is about perspective, attitude, how we look at the big picture, the arc of history, the arc of human evolution. And when it says they equate the 10,000 things with straw dogs, they mean Lao Tzu means he equates everything with straw dogs. And when he says the sage equates the people with straw dogs, he means equates everyone with straw dogs. So equating everything and everyone with straw dogs. What is the symbolism of the straw dog in sacred ceremonies, the holiest ceremonies in ancient China? They would make these dogs out of straw that were integral to the ceremony and were imbued with tremendous meaning and power. But then when the ceremony was over, the straw dogs were just discarded. This is one side of the coin of what is. This attitude of equating everything and everyone with straw dogs. And the 6th chapter, though, is as stark and bitter a truth as chapter 5 is. The chapter 6 is it's opposite in so many ways. And I'll read you Ursula Le Guin's translation, the great Ursula Le Guin's translation of chapter 6. The valley spirit never dies. The mysteries, the door of woman, it is the root of earth and heaven. Forever this endures, forever, and all its uses are easy. All its uses are easy. That's Wangari Maathai, the great Nobel Prize winning Kenyan environmentalist who started planting trees. You'll read more about her in the text. So, straw dogs in a mysterious valley, a way to view the arc of time, a way to view the arc of evolution, and the mysterious valley, the mystery of life. I don't want to analyze the nuances of meaning in the texts. I don't want to study the subtle differences in translations. The valley, the verdant valley, the valley of richness, fecundity, interdependence, complexity, the green and brown valley of mystery, empathy, ecstasy, all of it. Anyone who has ever walked or slept or lived in one of the true Lothlorians of this world knows this valley. Its green and brown power is resilient. Each of us, each of its woo manifestations, not manifestations, woo manifestations, is utterly unique, exquisite, irreplaceable, utterly, utterly. And when it is lost, it is lost. But the green power is indomitable, indestructible in its essential nature. It is irresistible. It is life itself. It cannot be voided by anything dependent upon the green power itself for life. And everything is dependent upon the green power for life. Nothing existing within the membrane of its love can escape it or live without it. Nothing. It always arrives new. The deep feminine, the mysterious valley, the valley of the feminine, in everything and everyone. The straw dogs, uh, they were imbued with meaning, great significance, but discarded. Truth is inescapable. The straw dog's teaching simply says all things must pass away. All things must pass away. Viraja. Viraja. I almost don't want to. I almost don't want to translate it to define it because usually you'll see it referred to as indifference or attachment. It is nothing like that. Nothing like indifference or attachment. If I had to define it, I would say it's more like abiding presence. Viraja. I will abide. Not I will not break. I will break. And as I break, I will abide and be the container for my brokenness. Viraja. And the great mysterious valley, the deep feminine, always rising up, bringing new life, indomitable, irresistible. You want to feel the mysterious valley's richness, interdependence, and fecundity. And concurrently, you want to feel the straw dog's utter clarity and unwavering presence. It's really, the great valley is about, the mysterious valley is about Wumanifestation. Wumanifestation, which is creation itself, Wumanifestation. And the straw dogs is really Maha attitude, the great attitude, Maha Mudra, the great Mudra, Maha Mudra, vast, vast. And then the last two, the second of the four that I wanted to share with you relate to the power of nothing. This is a beautiful painting from a Finnish painter of the 1800s. It's called To the Stars, To the Stars. But To the Stars isn't away. It's not away. We are in the stars. We live off of a star. Talk about mysterious valley. The Milky Way is a mysterious valley. It is all around us. We are stardust, as Mary's song says. We are. And this is where we live. So to the stars, to a more expansive knowing of the majesty of what is in all of us and in our world. No one really knows what's going to happen. No one really knows how this will all turn out. But despite all of the suffering inflicted by the three great scourges, despite the human race falling into a star-crushing black hole, I am wildly optimistic about our future because of the power of nothing. Now, two things about this before we conclude. The I know I've written about Joe's talk on nothing from the 1980s is available online through the lodge. The text of it is in a great song. I've written about it in Words of Power. I know I've discussed it with many of you in our personal dialogue, but I'm just going to touch on it briefly here because it's germane. So in the 1980s, they had, I don't know, was it the 50th anniversary or the 75th anniversary of the Golden Gate Bridge? I'm going to say it was the 50th anniversary. I looked it up, of the Golden Gate Bridge opening. And they were going to close. They were going to allow people to walk on the bridge that day, and there was some promotion around it. And the planners estimated 150,000 people, 200,000 people, 800,000 people or more showed up. 800,000 people or more. No one fell off the bridge. No one jumped off the bridge. There were children climbing all over where they shouldn't be climbing. Nothing bad happened. There were so many people, they flattened the bridge. You couldn't put enough cars on the bridge to flatten it. This experience moved Joe deeply. And he took it as an opportunity to talk about the power of nothing. He said, no, they didn't come because this event was advertised. They came. 800,000 people came because they felt in their hearts, this is the Golden Gate Bridge. This is the city of the Golden Gate. I want to be there on this bridge. Uh, it's got immense occult significance, the Golden Gate. Uh, I could go into it, but I won't, except there was a city where Gobi Desert is now, and it's where the great teachings and Light on the Path, little theosophical classic, came from. And if you dig into the lore around it, you'll find that that city was called the City of the Golden Gate, just as this one is. The power of nothing. And Joe said, when the power of nothing moves, uh, like a wave in the ocean of humanity. When that power moves, nothing can stop it. So I remember that how deeply moved Joe was and how he took it as an opportunity to point us toward the power of nothing, the power of what arises within us from the mysterious valley within us, what arises to move us forward. And the last and final one spins off of that because it was also in the 1980s, and I can't remember what year, but there's something terrible going on in the world. I wonder if you can hear me because I'm losing my video. I'm going to check here to see if anybody has texted me if you can still hear me. I'm going to go ahead as if you can still hear me. There's something terrible. So it froze on me there at the end, so I'm just going to end in this little short um, piece, and then I'll put them together when we post it online. Uh, I've been talking about the power of nothing, and that was something Joe talked about back in 1987. But there was another experience, another memory that I have from time with Joe from the 1980s, and I can't pinpoint the year, but something horrible was going on in the world. I forget which horrible thing it was, but I remember when it was the Mughal high holidays. It was December and it was crazy, and I fought my way up from Silicon Valley through the traffic, and everything was crazy outside. And I got to Joe's house. I parked the car and I staggered upstairs and I sat down with Joe on the sofa. Gwen was off in the back listening to a Giants game. And I said, Joe, what evolution? Human evolution? What the bleep? I didn't say bleep. And how could this be? There's no evolution. Nothing's happening here. And Joe said to me from the deepest, oh, he never was always talking from the deepest place, but from a great depth, he just said, just matter of fact, very matter of factly, he said, we just have to make it through the next 100 years. Now, this is in the 1980s. He said, we just have to make it through the next 100 years. I said, what do you mean? He said, 100 years from now, children are just going to come into incarnation. More and more of them are going to come into incarnation. And you're going to be, they're just going to know. They're just going to know and feel the kind of knowledge that it's feeling. They're going to know and they're going to feel what is. And you're going to be able to, or whoever, I wouldn't be around then either, but somebody would be able to sit down with them and tell them describe the teaching of Ramana Maharshi to them, which is just to ask yourself, who am I? And you would have them ask themselves, who am I? And the child would just know what this means in its deepest sense. There's not an intellectual answer. It's a mystical answer that cannot be put into words. Who am I? There's no answer. But we just have to make it through 100 years, and people are going to be coming in, and it's going to change everything. Now, that's incremental. So we're almost to the halfway point. We're somewhere around 40 years into that 100 years. But you can already see it happening in children. You can already see it happening in the youth and the children. A kind of knowing, a knowing that is feeling, not emotional, deeper, 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 a knowingness. Emotional intelligence, yes, but also even beyond, into an intuitive knowing about the truth of what is. So this is an increment. So we are holding space. Our job is to survive and hold space for the great transformation, the arc of the arc of evolution, the arc of herstory, the arc of history. We are holding space for something that is going on in human evolution. And it's already quickening. It's already quickening. And I want to tell you my final, the final feeling and conviction that I want to share with you is that, when I had that conversation with Joe in the 1980s, and he told me we just got to make it through the next 100 years, I was hopeless about humanity. I was hopeless. Tonight, I am wildly optimistic about the future of the human race, about the future of our country, if the power of nothing moves, and if we make it through this 100-year gauntlet, if we come out the other side of the wormhole. So, and it's much worse now than it was in the 1980s. I was hopeless in the 1980s. I'm wildly optimistic now, and our circumstances are much much, much worse, dire. But I have seen, I have felt, I have heard, I have witnessed the beginnings of this 100 years in the arc of evolution. You know, remember the 100th monkey? And a monkey figured out how to do something. There were these group of islands, and a monkey on one island figured out how to do something, and then the other monkeys on the island uh, learned, as if through osmosis, learned how to do it. And then every monkey on every one of the islands, at some point, all the monkeys knew it. Called the 100th monkey, right? It was when the 100th monkey knew it, all the monkeys, the collective monkey mind, this became knowledge in the collective mind of that monkey species in that group of islands. So I don't know what our number is. I don't know if it's hundreds of millions. I don't know if it's 100 million or 500 million. Or, I don't know if it's the billionth monkey, or in our case, the billionth ape. But that we are going to move through what we are moving through. And that if we don't know what's going to happen, but the power of nothing can flow. And we can hold this space. And we will come out the other side of the wormhole. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'll sing one of, because I feel them a lot. Tonight I will sing one of Joe's songs, Tibetan-inspired song. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Profound, brilliant glory. Right now and forever. Sarvasiti Shantu, may the Vajra of the heart be realized in this lifetime. Shaboom. Thank you for your patience.